Welcome to Police Academy Prep. This is Deputy Z. Today we will be going through the Law Enforcement Basic Recruit Book of the Police Academy, going into Chapter 5, Fundamentals of Patrol. This will be the in-depth recording version where I read from the entire chapter and provide insight to potential test questions and real-life situations. Be sure to watch the short edition version if you're looking for a more quicker, less in-depth recap consisting of only highlighted topics. Let's go ahead and jump into the material here. There's going to be 5 units in this chapter. Unit 1, Basic Patrol. Unit 2, Duties on Patrol. Unit 3, Non-Criminal Calls for Service. 4, Structure and Area Searches. And 5, Arrest Procedures. Patrolling is the main activity that you will perform daily. That is a test question there. Patrolling is the main activity you perform daily. This chapter provides an overview of the law enforcement techniques and tactics that you use while on patrol. This includes the use of communications equipment, community-oriented policing, and officer safety and survival skills. It also explains how to respond to non-criminal calls, how to conduct structure and area searches, and provide resources that officers use while on patrol. The primary purposes of patrolling are to maintain a public presence, enforce law and ordinances, and deter crimes. That's a test question there. The primary purposes of patrolling: maintain public presence, enforce laws and ordinances, and deter crime. Okay, patrolling in an assigned area also includes building a relationship with your community by developing resident and community contacts and providing information to residents. Test question here. Reactive patrol is about responding to or dealing with a crime after it occurs. So reactive is after. You are reacting to it. It requires responding immediately to an incident to increase the likelihood of catching a suspect. This strategy exists in traditional policing, where you're more likely to answer calls and take reports about recurring problems in your community. So a test question could also be phrased, what is a strategy in traditional policing where you are more likely to answer calls and take reports? That'll be reactive patrol. Now we move on to proactive patrol. It discourages criminal activity by having an officer regularly present in an area. So again, proactive is just being present in an area. To make your presence known, you must continuously travel through the patrol area and speak to people for short periods. You must talk to residents and interact with the public so that you can establish close ties with your community members who you can turn to for information in the future. Now we move on to community-oriented policing. That is going to be huge, both on the road and for the test here. So community-oriented policing is a concept that encourages the community to work with law enforcement and address what causes crime and other issues affecting the community. The goal of community policing is to look at issues that are typical of certain neighborhoods and to work with the community to fight these problems. Community-oriented policing has 2 main parts. These are test questions: community partnerships and problem solving. Community partnerships increase understanding and trust between law enforcement agencies and their communities. So for the test, know the 2 main parts: community partnerships and problem solving, and know the definitions of both community partnerships and problem solving. So community partnerships increase understanding and trust between law enforcement agencies and their community. Community partners can include law enforcement representatives, elected, sworn, or civilian, government representatives, public housing and mental health agencies, and community representatives, local businesses, professional groups, and neighborhood leaders. The second part of community-oriented policing is problem solving. Community partnerships allow law enforcement agencies to develop long-term, proactive programs and ways to address problems in the community. For example, you can make conversation with the owners of a local restaurant and the people who are dining there. Okay, let's see here. Any other information here? Okay, duty equipment inspection. So we're moving away from community-oriented policing here. So the equipment used while on patrol is vital to an officer's safety and effectiveness. Test question there. So equipment is vital to safety and effectiveness. Because you will rely on these tools, you must routinely make sure that each piece of equipment is working and is stored safely. At the beginning of your shift, what do? Check all the items on your duty belt to make sure all equipment is present and functional. Working flashlight. Inspect your patrol vehicle. Make sure everything is working inside. Check your emergency equipment, fire extinguishers, biohazard gear, first aid kits, etc. If your agency permits you or requires you to wear a body camera, you will be trained on its proper use, maintenance, and storage. You will also be trained on the type of activities that you are required to record. Make sure you know the legal requirements around having body camera and recording them. All right, roll call. Roll call, test question, is a brief operational meeting that officers attend before starting a shift. It provides information about current issues to keep in mind while on patrol. Information shared at roll call comes from the oral instruction of supervisors and the records and reports of officers from previous shifts. So roll call, they could probably have 2 or 3 questions on this on the test. So you could be the exact definition, which is what I mentioned here, brief operational meeting. Or they could ask, what provides information about current issues to keep in mind while on patrol. And that'll be roll call. All right, let's see here. BOLOs, informations, things that can impact you, wanted missing persons, stolen vehicles, suspicious incidents, etc. Safety concerns will also be discussed in roll call. One of the first things you will learn as a patrol officer is the layout of your assigned area, district, or jurisdiction. Not really sure if that will be a test question, but it's possible. So just one of the first things you'll learn is the layout of your assigned area, district, or jurisdiction. Your patrol area may remain the same or change daily depending upon factors related to staffing, the number of calls your agency receives, and individual assignments. All right. So before going on patrol, identify the boundaries of your assigned patrol areas. Become familiar with your assigned area by learning about the major roads, landmarks, and community resources so that you can respond quickly. Always have a map with important landmarks and patrol areas highlighted. Okay, identify people in the area such as neighborhood watches, business owners, mail carriers, utility and sanitation workers, newspaper delivery people, or anyone who walks or drives through the neighborhood regularly. So basically, to cut this short, it's just going to be know everybody, every person, everything that has to do with your area. Learn routes, learn how people go about their day in your area is basically everything they're saying here. Throughout a shift, your patrol status will change. Inform dispatch about any changes to your availability and location while on duty. Know your patrol area so that you can recognize suspicious activity. That is a testable question here. Suspicious activity is any activity that is abnormal for a specific time of day in a particular area. So basically, you learn your area so well that you learn to see things that are not normal, and that's when you investigate. And it could just be a random occurrence, or it could be criminal activity. Knowledge of the law and community and good observational skills will help you determine whether any suspicious activity is a crime in progress. So test question. Knowledge of the law and community and good observation skills will help you determine whether any suspicious activity is a crime in progress. For example, while patrolling a neighborhood at 2 a.m., you may notice an interior vehicle light on. This could be an indicator of criminal activity, such as a vehicular burglary. Identify and remove dangers that can be a threat to public safety, such as removing the door of a discarded refrigerator or reporting a broken streetlight. This kind of proactive patrolling anticipates and removes potential hazards and protects your community. Patrol methods. You can patrol in a variety of ways. 3 of the most common types of patrol are done by motor vehicle, foot, and bicycle. So that's a test question. Just remember 3 most popular: vehicle, foot, and bicycle. Forms of specialized patrol include marine, mounted, air, all-terrain vehicle, ATV, motorcycle, and personal transporters. So they'll probably ask a question both of specialized patrol methods and your common ones, so know those. The areas you are patrolling dictates which patrol method to use. That's possible, a test question there. While using a vehicle allows you to cover larger areas, it can also isolate you from residents and divert your attention. So for our test, I remember them giving an example and saying what type of patrol was this. So they might ask, which type of patrol allows you to cover larger areas, but it isolates you from residents and can divert your attention. That will be a vehicle, right? Foot patrol has many advantages, such as allowing you to be visible to the public and accessible to your community. You'll also be able to closely investigate community concerns and observe activity in specific areas. Patrolling on foot during the day or during the night has different advantages. During the day, you are highly visible to your community members and have greater access to the environment you are patrolling. This increased access can help you more effectively observe minor details in your surroundings. At night, you can use darkness to conceal your approach to calls for service. Day or night, keep changing your patrol routine to keep others from predicting your patrol patterns. A combination of vehicle and foot patrol allows you to cover a large area and closely observe specific areas. So, from that paragraph, what you need to know is the differences between patrolling at night and patrolling during the day. So during the day, you think highly visible and your community has access to you. Okay, at night, you can use darkness to conceal your approach. So those are 2 test questions there. And then the third test question is going to be to continue to change your patrol routine so that people don't learn your movements. Obviously, that's a big safety hazard. All right, here. Safety is an important aspect of your job as a law enforcement officer. To properly protect the public, you must also keep yourself safe. Officer safety should be assessed constantly. Test question. Officer safety should be assessed constantly. Okay? Improper training, poor planning, carelessness, and complacency can all contribute to officer fatalities and injuries. So that's a test question there as well. Let's see here. The community partnership that you establish can help keep you safe. Observation, test question. Observation is the act of recognizing an occurrence using your senses by noticing people, things, or circumstances. How can you improve these observation skills? Test question. Through practice, such as memorizing descriptions of cars, peoples, and details on the scene. So that's first one. And then 2, when observing others, take notes of their appearance, height, weight, hair, clothing, approximate age, and other personal details. 3, focus on situations or behaviors that are important to law enforcement, including what is usual or unusual activity within a certain area. 4, do not get distracted by a few elements, but observe the entire scene before making a judgment. So that whole paragraph has to do with observation. When you arrive at a scene, immediately identify cover and concealment areas that can be used to observe activity. This was a test question that threw a lot of people off. So basically it was like when you arrive at a scene, what should you immediately do first? A lot of people were, whether it's radio communications, whether they're going to throw things at you. The book answer is identify cover and concealment areas. Cover, test question, is anything that creates a bullet-resistant barrier between an officer and a threat, and it protects you from incoming gunfire. Examples, know these examples, they will be test questions. Engine blocks, brick walls, dirt embankments, concrete, steel, and thick wood, so like trees. On the test, they'll probably have both definitions for these, cover and concealment, and they might have versions of questions that will give you 4 options and say which one of these is cover or which one of these are concealment. So know the types as well. So concealment, we all know that one, is an object or group of objects that creates a visual barrier between an officer and a threat but may not stop a projectile. So examples would be shrubs, fences, interior walls, and objects that keep you hidden from view. So essentially things that you can shoot through are concealment. And remember, another test question here. So there's like 5 test questions in these 2 paragraphs. It is preferable to use cover rather than concealment. So you want to use cover versus concealment. Know that sight is often the starting point for observation. Be aware of various environmental and physical factors that can affect your vision. Visual defects like nearsightedness and farsightedness limit your vision if you do not wear corrective lenses. Lighting from objects such as streetlights or fluorescent lamps can distort color perception. Dimly lit objects tend to blend into the background and are hard to distinguish. Hearing that is affected by background noises such as traffic, noises from residences, or environmental sounds may prevent you from recognizing specific sounds that indicate a crime or incident is in progress. So we're going through all the senses here. Smell can help you identify dangerous or illegal substances. If you smell gasoline, petroleum products, natural gas, or gunpowder, you may determine that there is a potential threat. However, weather conditions on your health can affect your sense of smell. Know that certain smells can hide other smells. Know that some things you can't smell but are harmful if you inhale, such as chlorine gas or ammonia, possibly fentanyl, etc. Use caution when opening and closing containers. Do not smell the contents of a container, especially when dealing with any unknown substance. So when it comes to that smell paragraph, know the first sentence that can help you identify dangerous and illegal substances. Know the types of things you can smell that alert you to the area. And then also know do not smell containers with an unknown substance. Touch can help you identify items during a search or identify clues that can be used in an investigation. For example, touching tires or engines to check if they're hot. When using touch, make sure you have PPE and avoid touching something hazardous or biohazardous. Make sure to wear gloves to not disturb a crime scene. Taste is an important sense. It should never be used to identify an unknown substance. That's also a test question there. They'll ask you which one should never be used to identify an unknown substance, and it'll be taste. Attempting to taste a substance to determine its origin will put you at risk for sickness or death if it is a drug or poison. Safety and survival procedures. Under the stress of a survival situation, revert to your training. Test question. Survival readiness may include tactical preparedness, such as having a plan anytime you enter a building. So that's a test question we had as well. Survival readiness may include tactical preparedness, which is having a plan anytime you enter a building. Firearm proficiency, physical fitness, situational awareness, and first aid skills are part of survival readiness. Use mental conditioning, or known as the will to survive, and practice tactical preparedness to respond quickly and safely to a situation. So you're going to have some questions on tactical preparedness. By studying, mentally rehearsing, and regularly practicing safety procedures, you'll be prepared for difficult situations. That is a test question. So studying, mental rehearsing, and regularly practicing safety procedures. So real quick detour here. When it comes to the test, when I say, oh, this is definitely a test question, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get that. You'll probably get a version of it, if not the exact way I'm phrasing it. And also, you may not get it at all, because usually how the test makers will do it is they'll have a test bank of like 200 questions, and your test is probably only 50 questions. So what they'll do is every academy or every class, or they might have 2 or 3 versions per class, you're going to get a mix-up of questions, and it pools randomly. So there might be 5 versions of questions strictly on survival readiness, but you might only get 1 of them, none of them, 3 of them, 5 of them. So just keep that in mind. So I'm trying to give you as many different types of questions as possible. That way you can expect all types of them. The circumstances of a situation will dictate the tactics you use. Always be alert and use your observation skills to identify potential dangers. Remember several basic safety tips while on duty. All right, there are 6 tips here. Practice situational awareness. This is a bolded test question. Situational awareness is the ability to pay attention to what is going on around you. It requires staying aware of your environment so that you remain alert and are able to respond appropriately. Do not become complacent. Visually assess your surroundings, the number of people at the scene, the position of their hands, and threats such as weapons or items that could be used as weapons. So, for example, for test questions, they might ask you which one is situational awareness, and they want the straight definition, the ability to pay attention on what is going on around you. Or they might ask you, how do you do situational awareness? And that'll be visually assessing your surroundings, the number of people at the scene, position of your hands, threats, weapons, etc. Or they might ask you, what does situational awareness require? It requires staying aware of your environment so that you remain alert and are able to respond appropriately. So you see from that paragraph, there could be 3 or 4 different questions, and then they can phrase those different ways. So of those 4 questions, you basically need to know the topics. That way, if you get 1 of them, 2 of them, 3 of them, or all 4 of them, you can answer them easily, right? Okay, so the next step is to avoid tunnel vision, sometimes referred to as funnel vision, which is the narrowing of the field of view during a stressful event, such as a vehicle pursuit, a foot chase, or armed confrontation. Tunnel vision can cause you to miss other possible danger signs. To avoid tunnel vision, scan your surroundings, practice controlled breathing, and task-relevant self-talk. Okay, so again, how do you avoid tunnel vision? You scan your surroundings, practice controlled breathing, and task-relevant self-talk. Always identify yourself as a law enforcement officer and give direct commands such as stop or don't move. Speak in the appropriate tone of voice for the situation. If you believe a suspect is armed, call for backup units and use appropriate tactics to control, contact, and disarm the suspect. Disarm a suspect before leaving cover if possible. If you shoot a suspect, notify dispatch as soon as possible. Do not holster your weapon or rush to the injured suspect until you have deemed the suspect is no longer a threat, or ensure that there are no other shooters or accomplices. So basically, if you shoot somebody, don't just run up and start rendering aid. Shoot somebody, you scan, you're looking at their hands, you're making sure they have nothing in their hands or the capability to continue to harm you, shoot you, etc. Perform a self-check to make sure you are not injured, and communicate with responding backup. Stay behind cover and wait for backup officers before approaching the suspect. When appropriate, handcuff the suspect and provide first aid as needed. While in a patrol vehicle, you may face an attack from gunfire, firebombs, rocks, or other projectiles. If this happens, immediately get away from the area. Roll up the windows and turn off air conditioning to prevent chemicals from getting into the vehicle. Abandon your vehicle if it becomes disabled or if there's no other avenue of escape. If you are on foot and come under gunfire, seek immediate cover, call for assistance, and determine a safe approach for responding officers. These last few ones here are a little random. They could possibly be test questions. I wouldn't expect more than 1 from each paragraph, but just keep those in mind. Okay, now we're moving on to factors that compromise officer safety. Officers have a variety of equipment, including firearms, intermediate weapons, ballistic vests, flashlights, electronic devices, and handcuffs. Vehicles may have spotlights, takedown lights, a public address, PA system, emergency lights, and sirens. Make sure to check all equipment regularly. Train regularly, know how to use your equipment, and you need to be in good physical condition to handle the demands of dangerous situation. Being in poor shape puts you, other officers, and the public in danger, so keep that in mind. Make sure to get enough sleep and have exercise and a wellness program. Those are important parts of your fitness for duty. All right. Your ability to observe danger and signs of criminal activity is another important part of patrolling. So again, Your ability to observe danger and signs of criminal activity is an important part of patrolling. If you are busy or distracted, you may miss potential danger signs and cause injury or death to yourself and others or civilians. When interacting with someone, pay attention to non-verbal cues. These cues involve a person's body language, such as where they place their hands and if they are leaning away from or towards you. Always be aware of a person's hand placement because you may be able to stop them from using a weapon if they have one. Never assume that a call is routine. Not only a test question, but also very important in real life. Each call is different, and you must be prepared to react appropriately to each situation. Responding to a call without the appropriate mindset or attitude may cause you to become complacent during a potentially life-threatening situation. The ability to remain alert and observe your surroundings is crucial. Test question. You are expected to confront dangerous situations, so rely on your training and experience, not emotional reactions, to perform your duties safely. Okay. Law enforcement relies heavily on mobile communication devices such as radios, laptops, tablets, and smartphones. You may use mobile communication devices to access information regarding criminal records, driving history, and agency records, or you may use these devices to help complete a number of daily routine tasks, such as checking in and out when on and off duty, viewing and receiving calls for service, receiving dispatch information to minimize radio traffic, and sending electronic reports to a supervisor. Okay. Database access agreements and agency policies set rules on the dissemination of electronic information. All computer activities recorded per the FBI security policy need to be subject to review under public records law. With this in mind, always be professional whenever you use any form of electronic communication. This includes texting, emailing, and communicating via the radio. Okay. The radio, test question. The radio is the most common communication device that officers use. You will use the radio to send and receive vital information to and from dispatch or other officers, call for backup, or identify a suspect or wanted person. For your safety, it is essential to know how to use the radio. Basic police radio communication depends on 3 types of equipment: dispatch console or base station, the vehicle-mounted radio, or the portable or handheld radio. Where you're probably only going to have a portable or handheld radio. You're not going to have these other methods here. Okay, many types of brands, models, etc. Let's get to the important stuff here. Public Safety Telecommunicators, PSTs, also known as dispatchers, are the hub of contact for patrol officers. So one, test question is, know that PSTs, Public Safety Telecommunicators, are also known as dispatchers. And 2, know that they are the hub of contact for patrol officers for the test. Dispatchers transmit calls, receive calls for assistance from officers, broadcast information about wanted and missing persons, check records, and perform many other tasks daily to assist patrol officers. So possible for 4 questions in that one paragraph there. So know those. Dispatchers are generally non-sworn personnel who operate the radio and telecommunication systems. They typically work in a centralized area with access to telephones and other resources to assist you. Dispatchers will dispatch law enforcement officers, dispatch fire, rescue, and EMS, dispatch other public safety services to the scene, and provide real-time information from federal, state, and local crime databases. So know those 4 things that dispatchers can do. When using the radio, conduct all radio communications in a professional manner. Remember that you have no expectation of privacy on the radio, and it's possible that everything is recorded from the radio as well. Here we go. Transmit only information related to law enforcement business. Appropriate radio system use includes relaying same thing over and over again. Road or weather conditions, criminal records checks, calls for service, driver's license status, law enforcement related messages, etc. Radio protocol. Test question, bolded question here. Radio protocol describes the customs and regulations for constructing and transmitting radio messages. It also includes the proper use of codes and signals, which may be different among agencies and regions. Some agencies use a phonetic alphabet or uniform codes, while others prefer plain talk, which is speaking in a clear, concise, professional manner without codes or signals. So know what plain talk is. Clear, concise, professional manner without codes and signals. That'll be a test question there. Radio codes and signals save airtime and express exact and definite meanings. They also keep radio communications consistent and professional. There are 4 basic radio codes. Know these for the test. Signals is the first one. Communication is a system that uses the word signal before numbers. For example, signal 0 often means an armed person. The phonetic alphabet system uses the letters of the English alphabet to identify letters In voice communication, for example, A alpha, B bravo, C Charlie, etc. That is the phonetic alphabet. The numeric or 10 code system uses the number 10 before other numbers that represent specific activities. For example, 1015 often means prisoner in custody. So again, numeric or 10 code. And then you have the alphanumeric code, which combines letters and numbers, usually when you're reading a tag. So whether they be Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, 1, 2, 3. So that's alphanumeric when you combine numbers and letters. Numeric or 10 code is where you put the 10 before something. Phonetic alphabet is just the letters, A alpha, B bravo, and signals are saying signal before the number. Okay, let's see here. Before making a voice transmission, listen to, make sure there's no other radio traffic. Press and hold the transmit button down for about 1 second before speaking. Otherwise, your first words will be lost. So remember that for the test question as well. Let's see. Be professional at all times. Stressful situations, your voice may fluctuate. Interactions with dispatch. Depending on your agency policies, you may have to notify dispatch whenever you go on or off duty. Checking in and out during the shift is important for your safety. Communicate with dispatch throughout your shift so that dispatch can send calls for service to you and monitor your status and safety. Receiving and answering calls. When you receive a call from dispatch, respond with your assigned identification and current location. Record the information that dispatch provides and do not leave anything to memory. Alright, let's see here. Officer-initiated transmission. While on patrol, you may see a situation that you'll need to investigate. Whenever you make self-initiated action during patrol, give dispatch the following information as applicable. Identification, your identification location, the type of situation, the type of assistance needed, description of involved peoples or groups, and description of the vehicle, license information, color, make, and model, etc. Okay, now we're moving on to querying. Test question bolded term here. Querying is the process of gathering information by entering or running a search in a database for law enforcement purposes. It is sometimes called a vehicle check, records check, or wants and warrants check. When you are on patrol and need information quickly, dispatch may conduct queries for you. You may also run the information yourself using a computer in your patrol vehicle. Alright, now we're going to talk about FCIC, the Florida Crime Information Center. It is a database housed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that provides statewide information on people and property, driver's licenses and registrations, wanted and missing persons, stolen guns, vehicles, securities, and other properties, people's status files and computerized criminal histories, and concealed weapons license. So remember, that's FCIC, and it is housed at the FDLE. Okay, and that list I went through are things that it can provide information on. FCIC is connected to what? NCIC, which is the National Crime Information Center. NCIC is a national database maintained by the FBI, and it retains records of stolen, abandoned, and recovered property and wanted and missing persons files. So test question, a couple test questions here. One, know what FCIC is. That's the Florida Crime Information Center. Know what NCIC is, National Crime Information Center. Know that NCIC, the national version, is maintained by the FBI. And know that FCIC is housed at FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Also know that FCIC contains records of stolen, abandoned, and recovered property and wanted and missing persons files. Know that NCIC also contains the National Sex Offender Registry, as well as files of people who are on supervised release, have active protection orders, are foreign fugitives or immigration violators, and are known or suspected terrorists or gang members. And these record from all 50 states. FCIC information sources. FCIC contains the criminal histories of people who have been arrested in Florida. When a person is arrested, the booking agency first submits the person's arrest information and fingerprints to FDLE. FDLE then reviews the information in the fingerprints and creates a computerized criminal history, CCH, and FCIC. So CCH stands for Computerized Criminal History. A state attorney's office, a clerk of court, and the Department of Corrections can add more charges, arrests, dispositions, and other information. CCH information is always changing. After using printed CCH information, destroy it by shredding or burning any copies. Alright. Only law enforcement agencies that are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, can enter data about stolen property and wanted and missing persons into FCIC. The entering agency is responsible for the accuracy, timeliness, and detail of the records entered, and removal when no longer needed. So generally, your agency is going to be open 24/7. That's just how it is. FCIC and NCIC is a large system that contains sensitive information. For this reason, you must complete a Criminal Justice Information Services certification training course. So, know what CJIS stands for? Criminal Justice Information Services. And know that you need that certification in order to have access to FCIC and NCIC. Users must also agree to a state and national fingerprint-based background check within 30 days of starting their job or being assigned to an FCIC terminal, which your agency will do that, so no worries there. Okay, strictly law enforcement use. Using these systems for purposes other than your law enforcement duties may result in disciplinary action, loss of certification, and criminal charges. And your agency could also lose access as well. Remember that FCIC, NCIC logs all user transactions and they are recorded. So keep that in mind. Okay, so when you're doing a query on FCIC, NCIC, if you're doing a person query, provide the person's last name, race, date of birth, and sex. And also, it's not in the book here, but if you have their driver's license number, social security, those are things that will help as well. Stolen property query, make sure you provide basic information about the item, so serial numbers, color, make, model, etc. Firearm, provide the serial number and the manufacturer, so 6 hour, and the number is ABC12345, right? Vehicle, provide the vehicle registration, the vehicle identification number, the VIN, or the registration decal number. Generally, you're just going to give them the tag, and if the tag comes back to the right vehicle, then they're fine, but if it doesn't, then you're going to have to give them the VIN. But generally, it's good to always have the VIN on hand. Now, if it's a vessel, then you need the hull identification number, HIN. I mean, unless you're working on the water, you're really not going to need that. And then, let's see here. When you query the database, FCIC, NCIC, the results will show a list of possible matches that the data are the same or similar to the information submitted. To make sure that the person or property is an exact match, you will need to provide additional information such as person's height, weight, scars, tattoo, birthmark, social security number, driver's license number, etc. An exact match in a database is called a hit. That is a test question. Exact match is a hit. Make sure when you have a hit, you confirm all the information is accurate. So name, date of birth, etc. The purpose of the hit confirmation process is to make sure that the information in the system is active and matches the person or property of interest. Even if the hit indicates that the entering agency does not require one person's extradition, you should still contact the entering agency in case they desire a follow-up report. Extradition test question is the surrender of a fugitive to another state or nation that has jurisdiction. Okay, now we'll move on to criminal justice databases. The Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, that is DHSMV, know that. Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, DHSMV, maintains an online search database known as DAVID, Driver and Vehicle Information Database. So you need to know DAVID for the test and DHSMV. Authorized users have the ability to view driver's license applications, information, photographs and signatures, state-issued identification cards, identification documents used by non-citizens, driving and vehicle history for motorists, insurance information, and records of vehicles or vessels registered in Florida. You can also request that a driver be reassessed for the driver's license through DAVID. And Chapter 12, you discuss more of this in detail. All right, here we go. Members of the criminal justice community are the criminal justice network. Let's try that again. Members of the criminal justice community use the criminal justice network, CJNet, to access many other valuable information databases. These include Insight, a statewide crime intelligence database, Florida's integrated criminal history system, Falcon, Child Abduction Response Team, CART, and the Florida Sexual Offender and Predator Database. Your agency's policies and procedures explain which databases are available to you and how to access them. So remember that Criminal Justice Network includes basically all these types of databases here. Improper management of criminal databases and information is a misuse of your position. That is a test question. In regards to the tests, a lot of people are like, oh, is Falcon and CART and CJNet on there? Most likely, yes. Now, is it going to be a super tough question? It's probably going to be more straightforward. So, for example, CART, they might ask what that stands for, and you might have to respond with the correct answer, which is Child Abduction Response Team. So just know the term, and then know the letters they use for it. So Falcon is Florida Integrated Criminal History System. CART is Child Abduction Response Team. CJNet is the Criminal Justice Network. DAVID, obviously, is the Driver and Vehicle Information Database. GHSMV is the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles. Okay, here we go. The Florida statutes state that it is a felony to willingly, knowingly, and without authorization access or allow access to any criminal justice computer system, or computer network. All right, let's see here. Now we're moving on to initial response. All right, when receiving a call, evaluate the situation based on the information you receive from dispatch. Even though incidents vary, use the same basic steps when responding to calls for service. Determine the safest response to a scene that will protect you, other officers, and the public. You may have access to electronic mapping systems to locate areas quickly. Collect as much information as possible about a call. Identify the type of incident, the location, the complainant's name, and the relationship to the location. While on your way, consider the safest arrival point and the possible threats at the incident. Threats may include weapons or things that can be used as weapons, and hazards. Plan how you will drive to the scene. You may not always want to use emergency lights and sirens. Depending on the nature of the call and agency policies, you may turn off the vehicle headlights at night to avoid detention when nearing a scene, such as when responding to a robbery in progress. You may need to reduce speed to avoid driving past the address and to avoid letting the suspects know you are there. Arriving at the scene of a call. Once you have arrived, stop a short distance from the address. Possible test question there. If other units are responding, you and other officers should coordinate the direction from which you will arrive. Assess the area immediately surrounding the patrol car and advise dispatch of any suspicious vehicles or people leaving the area. Check for obvious clues, such as a vehicle parked in a lot that is normally empty at that time of day, or the absence of a vehicle usually parked in a specific location. Make sure to close the door gently and quietly. Be aware of items that make noise. Loose change and keys. Alright, here we go. So we're moving to safety when approaching a scene. Be sure to do the following when you approach a scene. Take and maintain the best tactical position, especially if you are waiting for backup. Approach suspicious vehicles on foot and carefully check for occupants. Feel the hood of a vehicle or heat to determine if the vehicle was driven recently. Get close to buildings by moving behind parked cars, fences, trash cans, or shrubbery. Walking in a low crouching position and taking an indirect route will help minimize the chances of detection. Constantly survey the building entrances and surrounding areas to ensure safety. When using a flashlight to examine the perimeter of the building, carry it in your support hand, your non-dominant hand. So remember, when you're carrying a flashlight, it's in your non-dominant/support hand. Hold it away from your body so you not make yourself a target. As soon as possible, determine the type of incident and if there is need for backup. Determine if there is any injuries and the extent of our injuries. Apply first aid, request medical assistance, etc. Let's see, you're gathering information from complainants, witnesses, and victims. At the scene of an incident, you may identify everyone involved. These include complainants, victims, witnesses, and suspects. As you gather information, remember to treat everyone involved with dignity and respect. By assessing the scene and making these initial contacts, you can determine the type of complainant. Alright, and you can also determine the type of crime, civil, criminal, felony, or misdemeanor. Make sure to identify how much time has passed and whether or not the suspect has left the scene. When interviewing a complainant, victim, or witness, remember to ask for identification and personal information, such as names, addresses, phone numbers, and other contact information. Be professional, yet personal, by introducing yourself by name and by using the person's name to establish rapport. Separate everyone and ask each complainant, victim, or witness to describe what happened. Then ask follow-up questions to clarify the incident. Ask them to describe the suspect and if they'd be willing to identify the suspect later. Take detailed notes of these accounts for documentation. If they know the suspect, they may also have information that can help you find that person. So ask them the suspect's location, the identity and description, are they violent, and the mode and direction of travel. These facts may help you find the suspect. If required, give written statements, as these will help establish probable cause for an arrest. Now we move on to a BOLO. If you're listening to this, make sure to check out my BOLO video I created last week. That'll be helpful when understanding BOLOs. I go a little more in depth in how to place them in person, so check that video out. Recall that a BOLO, be on the lookout, gives a description of the subject's name, and any additional information that would help apprehend or locate them. Local, state, or national agencies issue BOLOs that may include descriptions of missing or wanted persons, stolen property, suspicious activity, or other areas needing attention from patrol. BOLOs can contain a range of information, and they have no standard form or content. They may include printed information, photographs, verbal reports, electronic messages, or internet postings. A bolo should include as much of the following information as possible: subject's name and identifying information, the location of the incident, the reason for the bolo, the alleged violation, the suspect's last known location and direction of travel, a description or photograph of the person, vehicle, or property involved. Bolos are also issued for ambers, silver alerts, blue alerts, and purple alerts. All right. Make sure to cancel a bolo when you find the person or no longer looking for them. Make sure to follow agency policies and procedures when issuing a bolo. When developing a plan, now we're going to talk about suspects here. When developing a plan for contacting a suspect, decide if you should contact the suspect right away or wait for backup. When approaching a suspect, consider their criminal history, behavior, and possible weapons. Always watch the person's hands and body language when talking with them. Keeping safe when approaching a suspect is a coordinated effort between a contact officer and a backup or cover officer. Each officer fills a different role in the approach. Usually the primary officer on the call is the contact officer. So again, usually the primary officer is the contact officer. The contact officer, test question, is the officer that is responsible for leading the approach and handling all communication with the suspect, including commands and interviews. This allows the suspect to be focused on one officer's voice instead of having multiple officers giving different directions at the same time. The backup officer is the cover officer. So remember, primary is the cover officer, or the primary officer is the contact officer. The backup officer is the cover officer. The cover officer is strictly responsible for officer safety concerns at the scene. The cover officer's responsibilities include observing the contact officer's interaction with the suspect and watching for hazards such as hostile crowds, traffic, or escape routes. Additional officers share cover responsibilities and assist the contact officer as requested. Okay, so initiating contact. When moving towards a suspect, approach carefully. Keep your eyes on them. Make sure that you keep a safe distance. Stay alert to possible resistance or threats. Observe the suspect's position and body movements for indications of flight or assault. And continuously scan for weapons. Alright. Continue to seek information by interviewing and observing the suspect. If you are having a justifiable reason to believe that the suspect poses a threat or may flee, handcuff upon initiating contact. If they are armed, conduct a pat-down search. Share all current information on the suspect with backup officers. When initiating contact with a suspect, you may have to deal with uncooperative subjects. Resisting an officer without violence occurs when a person non-violently resists, obstructs, or opposes a law enforcement officer while they are performing their legal duties. For example, not obeying lawful verbal commands, refusing to be handcuffed, or refusing to provide identification would be considered resisting without violence, which can be an additional charge. If they're charged in with theft, burglary, whatever, you throw in a resisting without violence. Okay, so if the person... Well, let's start over here. So first, you should get voluntary compliance. You ask the person to comply. If the person still does not comply, tell the person to comply. If the request and the command do not work, you have the authority to make the subject comply with the lawful order using techniques explained in defensive tactics. So this is the ask, tell, make method. Even though the subject may be resisting, remember that you are obligated to maintain professionalism and treat the subject with respect. Now we move on to resisting an officer with violence, and this occurs when a person knowingly resists or obstructs a law enforcement officer by committing or offering to commit a violent act towards a law enforcement officer while the officer is performing their legal duties. An example of resisting with violence is when a suspect violently fights with officers while being restrained and handcuffed. Remember this, a person can still resist with violence while in handcuffs. Never assume that the person is being compliant. So, quick tangent, I was in the Sally Port dropping somebody off. When I pulled them out of my car, they lowered their shoulder and ran into me and pinned me up against my vehicle. I gained control, no big deal. They were in handcuffs, but that person was showing clear signs of wanting to fight and obviously targeted me and committed a violent act. So I charged them with resisting with violence at that point. So yes, people in handcuffs can still bum rush you. They can try to headbutt you. They can try to stomp on you, etc. So just always be aware. Remember that people sometimes provide false information, such as fake name, date of birth, to disguise their real identity. I had someone who looked just like his brother trying to provide his brother's name and date of birth. And the only way I even found out, I mean, I feel like I would have found out by doing more investigation, but you never know. But I would like to say that I would have found out. But if it wasn't for his wife was like, she came up to me afterwards, like, hey, like, he's lying. Like, that's his brother's name. This is his real name. And when I looked him up, they had basically, if brothers are close in age, they look, in your 30s, you're going to look similar to your brother. Is it possible that I totally would have missed that information, maybe didn't do more due diligence, and I could have possibly put, arrested his brother while taking the other brother into jail? That's possible, and I imagine that probably does happen more often than not. Thankfully, I did more information, and like I said, I would like to say that wouldn't have happened and I would have found it out. But just keep that in mind, that people will provide you fake identities, and they might not even be fake. They just are real identities. They just are family members, cousins, brothers. I had an example of twins, and thank God we were able to identify that they were twins because they were identical. And when I mean identical, they were identical, and their first names were similar, like hypothetically, like they both started with J or something, like John and James, right? And same last name, same date of birth, looked exactly the same. So, keep that in mind, that can happen as well. Okay, techniques to help identify people when you believe they're providing false information. You can use David. You can check social security number. You can do their address, compare it, both FCIC, NCIC, and a David. And if someone does have a portable fingerprint scanner, you can use that as well. Faces as well if you have access to that. All right, responding as backup. You will be frequently called to help other officers during calls for service, or you may decide on your own to provide backup based on the circumstances. Calls for backup may involve responding to non-life-threatening, high-risk, or life-threatening situations. So that's basically all situations. Non-life-threatening situations can range... Okay, so know these examples. These will be on the test. So non-life-threatening situations can range from assisting with admin paperwork or providing additional equipment. High-risk situations may involve assisting with serving a warrant, responding to a vehicle pursuit, or responding to a scene where the suspect is still present. Life-threatening situations may include dealing with an active shooter or a vehicle crash with serious injuries. Backup officers can determine how to respond to a call based on several factors. These may include the nature of the call, the type of assistance needed, their familiarity with the area, or the demeanor of the requesting officer. Always stay in communication with the requesting officer, including visual and verbal contact. You can change your response according to the situation as more information is provided. Upon arrival, survey the scene and maintain situational awareness. Backup officers should minimize flashlight use to keep others safe at the scene. Make visual or verbal contact with the primary officer to determine what type of assistance is needed. Always remain alert and avoid distractions, such as using your cell phone. The role of the backup officer on the scene is to provide whatever assistance the primary officer needs. Test question. The role of a backup officer is to provide whatever assistance the primary officer needs. Okay, now we're moving on to BTAM, which is Behavioral Threat Assessment and Management. Despite a decrease in the overall violent crime rate over the past 3 decades, the United States has experienced a recent increase in the frequency and deadliness of targeted violence incidents, including mass targeted violence such as active shooter incidents. Targeted violence refers to incidents of violence involving an identifiable person of concern who possesses the intent and capability to use physical harm to an identifiable target. So again, test question. Targeted violence is basically an identifiable person who is looking to harm an identifiable target. So basically a perpetrator trying to harm victims. These incidents are goal-directed, premeditated, and predatory. And they may occur in or across many locations, including homes, workplaces, schools, government offices, public events, hospitals, and places of worship. Practical research conducted by the U.S. Secret Service, FBI, and other government entities has some revealed key findings. 1. Human behavior, usually violent behavior, that cannot be reliably predicted, but it may be prevented. Psychological or demographic profile. No psychological or demographic profile exists for an active shooter or perpetrator of targeted violence. So profiling is not an effective tool for preventing targeted violence. Targeted violence is almost never impulsive or random. It is a result of organized thinking and behaviors such as planning and preparation, which can be observed and reported. Mental health issues are rarely the main cause of targeted violence incidents. While communicated threats should never be ignored, persons of concern for targeted violence often do not communicate threats to a target or to law enforcement before they attack. Know that there is a difference between making a threat and posing a threat. So those 5 bullet points under basically BTAM, know them because they will ask them in different ways for the test. So BTAM, Behavioral Threat Assessment and Management, know this definition, is a proactive investigative process used to identify, assess, and manage the risk of targeted violence posed by an identifiable or identified person. That is a test question. You identify, assess, and manage, okay? This includes observable attack-related behaviors that indicate the perpetrator may be on a pathway to violence. Know that term, pathway to violence. These behaviors may warn of future targeted violence against an identifiable target or the community in general. The primary goal of BTAM is to prevent or mitigate acts of targeted violence, especially incidents of mass targeted violence, and its primary functions are to identify, assess, and manage people of concern within the local community. That's a lot there, but let's go through this again. This is a test question. The primary goal of BTAM is to prevent or mitigate acts of targeted violence. Okay, and the primary functions of BTAM, so again, primary goal, mitigate acts of targeted violence, and the primary functions are to identify, assess, and manage. Okay, we're going to start with identify. On patrol, you will respond to a variety of calls for service where you may see or hear something that leads you to identify a person of concern for future targeted violence. Assess. The core of BTAM, this is a test question. The core of BTAM is to assess a person's risk for future targeted violence against an identifiable target. Assessment involves collecting and analyzing behavioral information from all possible sources, including your own observations and knowledge. Okay, trained BTAM professionals will primarily be responsible for this type of investigation. So again, the core of BTAM is to assess a person's risk for future targeted violence. The primary goal of BTAM is to prevent or mitigate acts of targeted violence, and the primary functions are to identify, assess, and manage. And under assess, the core of BTAM is to assess. So know those. I know it's a lot, but you not know them. Okay, then we have manage. In BTAM, law enforcement agencies manage a person of concern using strategies based on the assessment to prevent or mitigate acts of targeted violence. You may be asked to assist BTAM investigators in managing a person of concern. So it could be protective custody, monitoring the person's behaviors over time, enforcing legal processes, restraining orders, risk protection orders, or referring the person to a mental or behavioral health care provider. Remember that you may be the only member of law enforcement to observe critical information regarding a person of concern progressing along a quote-unquote, pathway to violence before they attack. Reporting that information promptly and accurately is necessary to help prevent targeted violence. So in real life, coming across a BTAM type situation would be responding to, let's just say a domestic call, and you're dealing with the parents, whatever it is, what it is, and you just happen to speak to the kid, and the kid's like, yeah, this is, really pissing me off. I feel like I'd want to shoot at a school someday. And you're like, oh, shoot. You know what I mean? That's when you call your sergeant, you're like, hey, we might have a BTAM type situation here. He just threatened to, shoot up a school, or possibly shoot up a school, or threatened that, it might not be as direct of a situation. Maybe you're going to a Signal 20 type mentally ill call, and you get there, and he's talking about all these people he hates, and how he might want to go out in a blaze of glory and affect the people around him, where maybe you don't have enough for a crime because they're kind of speaking in broad terms, but it could be enough for BTAM, where you can get your sergeant and supervisor involved and possibly trained people in that specialized unit that can come out and maybe evaluate a little bit better. But you notifying somebody is the first step, and possibly the only step to having somebody know that this situation is going on. All right, responding to a non-criminal call for service. While patrolling, you will respond to a variety of calls for service that are non-criminal in nature. A non-criminal call for service may range from a request to obtain specific information to a request to perform a security check on a building. Every call for service requires you to respond in a professional manner and to adjust your command presence to fit the situation. The public's trust in you depends on whether your authority is seen as appropriate, proper, and just. If your authority is not seen as legitimate, the public may not cooperate. When you arrive at the scene, find the complainant and introduce yourself in a courteous manner. Listen to the person and then determine what services the caller needs and whether you can assist or provide referrals. Obviously, some good referrals could be referring someone to Department of Veterans Affairs, referring someone to Department of Children and Families, maybe local mental health services, the county clerk of courts, etc. All right, here we go. directing people to assist. Most of the time, you'll engage with a compliant person. However, there may be times when you need to call on bystanders to help. Typically, these are emergency situations such as rescuing a victim, providing first aid, or overcoming resistance from a suspect. Make sure to evaluate and determine how much and what kind of help you need. Florida law authorizes officers to command assistance from the public in certain situations, such as apprehending or seizing or securing a person for breach of the peace, or in the case of a rescue or escape of a person arrested upon a civil process. All right, now we're going to move on to well-being and security checks. You may notice a situation that requires a well-being check, such as a bad odor coming from a residence or an abnormal presence of flies, which shows lack of activity. Let's see here. So, could be well-being check, welfare check, the person could be dead inside, could just be rotten food, etc. Make sure when you arrive at a location, notify dispatch if any vehicles are present, conduct a brief search of the area, look for things such as overflowing mailbox, etc. If you cannot make contact with the person and no immediate signs of distress are present, contact dispatch or record your actions on your in-vehicle computer. Follow your agency policies and procedures when notifying your chain of command. In an emergency situation, follow your agency policies and procedures if you have reasonable belief that a person is in immediate danger. In this situation, you may enter the property by force and search the premises. If you determine that you need immediate access to the person, you may need to call for backup or additional resources to assist with the forced entry. So usually like fire rescue or if someone has a crowbar. If necessary, provide first aid, and when appropriate, contact the person who requests the well-being to update them on the situation. Security checks. While patrolling an assigned area, you may conduct security checks of residents, buildings, or grounds. Residents may request security checks, or you or dispatch may initiate one. Notify dispatch when you arrive at the location and park your vehicle at a distance from the building when observing the area. All right, let's move on here. All right, death notifications. Notifying the next of kin. You may be assigned to make a death notification when your agency conducts a death investigation or when it gets a request from another jurisdiction. You can obtain the name, address, and telephone number of the deceased person's next of kin using criminal justice databases. If you use the David Emergency Contact Information, ECI, follow your agency policies and procedures. Remember that ECI is for emergency purposes only and cannot be used as an investigative tool. After you have located the relatives, make a personal visit to the family if possible. Be sensitive to cultural and religious issues when handling this emotional situation. Let's see here. If the next of kin lives in another state or town and is not accessible, contact the local law enforcement agency in that area. So generally, your agency probably has a team that handles death notifications. If they don't, then you'll be responsible. But generally, you're not going to be responsible unless they are on the scene or you call them and they are on their way, right? Then that is what it is at that point. You're going to be the one doing it. Okay. There are basic things you can do to display empathy when delivering a death notification. Be careful to avoid statements such as "I know how you feel" or "God never gives us more than we can handle." The following are some recommendations when making a death notification. Be absolutely certain of the identity of the deceased. Make a clear statement that the death has occurred. So don't say he's gone to another place, he's feeling much better now. No. Your loved one, so-and-so John Smith, has died. Be very clear. Allow time for the venting of feelings. Obtain medical help if necessary. Assist in notifying significant others. Make referrals for follow-up support services. And describe the procedure for identifying the deceased. Now we have animal complaints. You may respond to calls involving domestic, wild, and exotic animals. Domestic animals may include livestock or family pets such as dogs and cats. Common calls involving wildlife include alligators, snakes, bears, raccoons, and birds. Test question. An exotic animal is any animal that is not native to Florida, such as pythons, parrots, and monitor lizards. When arriving on scene, identify an immediate threat and injury that may require first aid and call EMS if needed. You may need to call FWC, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. You may obviously need additional services here. Okay. Fire-related incidents. If you arrive at the scene of an incident and see a fire, notify dispatch immediately and request assistance. Make sure to evacuate anyone as needed. Primary responsibility of an officer after the arrival of fire department personnel is to assist the firefighters and the fire marshal in the investigation and maintain crowd and traffic control. So if you're on a fire call, the primary people are going to be fire rescue and the fire marshals. So you are just going to be assisting with crowd control, making sure the scene is safe, etc. Responding to a vehicle fire. When responding to a vehicle fire, ask dispatch for all relevant information regarding the incident. Dispatch may be able to provide the specific information on the fire, where it is, what is on the fire, if anyone is trapped, and if fire rescue has been notified. Consider wind direction and speed, traffic conditions, etc. when responding. Consider fire intensity. If you can't put out the fire yourself, request fire rescue and rescue aid. If there's a fire, you're requesting fire rescue regardless, even if the fire is small, because you never know, and liability is big these days, and you never know if something's going to spread more than what you can handle. So if it's outside of your wheelhouse, we are not firefighters, then you need to contact the trained professionals for that specific type of situation. All right. Cones and flares. Determine the vehicles is occupied. Let's see. Move victims to a safe place. Provide first aid. If they are beyond your rescue ability, make every reasonable effort to immediately extinguish the fire. Let's see here. Okay, when it comes to fire extinguishers, these were on the test and these caught people off guard. So let's go through these carefully here. Foam fire extinguishers are best for paper or wood fires. So remember that. Foam extinguishers are good for paper or wood. CO2 fire extinguishers are more suited for flammable liquids. So if we're talking about a vehicle, we're talking about gasoline, so you're going to use a CO2 fire extinguisher, and honestly, that's probably what you're given. You're not given a foam extinguisher. Fire extinguishers may help gain access to trapped victims. Once the victims have been removed and there is no immediate threat to life or property, secure the scene for the arrival of fire personnel. Highly flammable or combustible items in the vicinity must be evaluated and moved if practical. Okay, false alarms. A false alarm of a fire occurs when an alarm system is activated but no evidence of reasonable threat exists. The false alarm could be caused intentionally or due to a malfunction. If you are dispatched to a building for an alarm that has malfunctioned, this is not an offense. However, it becomes a criminal offense if someone has intentionally caused the alarm. When charging a suspect with false alarm of a fire, document that the suspect, without reasonable cause, circulated a false alarm of fire. Okay, so now we have lost, stolen, or recovered property. Here we go. All right, lost property. Items that people commonly report as lost property include cell phones, driver's license plates, credit cards, social security cards, and insurance-related claims, or any losses due to natural disaster. Use a general information report to document these incidents, or a lost property report. Get a description of the property and an estimate of its value. Precise descriptions of the lost property are important for later identification and recovery. Note the unique distinguishing identifiers, such as scratches or unique parts, to help identify the property. Items with serial numbers, make sure to enter those. Okay, let's try this again. On items with serial numbers or other unique identifying numbers, record the numbers in your report and enter it into FCIC, NCIC. So if there's no serial number and there's no unique identifying marks, you can't enter an NCIC, NCIC. Make sure to conduct a database query and a local system search that searches for recovered property in local pawn shops. Keep in mind that lost property may turn into stolen property. Now we have stolen property here. You may come across stolen property on routine patrol, during traffic stops or arrest, or from a concerned resident. Upon receiving stolen property, handle the property according to your agency policies, which may include conducting an FCIC NCIC check, requesting the entering agency to remove the item from the database after verifying it's stolen, attempting to identify the owner, photographing the item, processing the item for evidence, returning the item to the owner if there is no forensic value, submitting the item as evidence if you cannot locate the owner, and forwarding any suspect or item identification to the appropriate department in your agency for follow-up investigation. Okay. Let me see here. Now we have recovered property. Recovered property may be abandoned, seized, or found. Inventory the items, complete a property receipt form, and give the items to your agency property clerk for storage or destruction. Take all of the necessary steps to identify the owner or determine if the items are evidence of a crime. If you have identified the owner and have deemed that the property is not evidence, attempt to return the property according to your agency policies and procedures. If you determine the property is stolen, refer to the information on the stolen property above. property that was recovered is entered in NCIC as recovered property. Florida law allows an owner or operator of a theme park, entertainment complex, zoo, museum, aquarium, public food service establishment, or public lodging establishment to dispose of or donate any lost or abandoned property found on its site. However, the owner or operator must maintain a record of the property and hold the property for at least 30 days. If the property remains unclaimed after 30 days, the owner or operator may not sell the property but may dispose of or donate the property to a charitable institution. Okay, now we have property disputes. So we have property boundary disputes. Property disputes between neighbors are usually civil in nature. For example, a property owner plants trees in his backyard, but his neighbor says that trees are on his side of the property line. The property owners would need a recent survey to identify who owns the property where the trees were planted. This is considered a civil dispute and would need to be done outside of the criminal justice process. Advise the parties to seek the appropriate remedies in civil court. Then we have landlord and tenant disputes. You will sometimes be called to disturbances that arise from landlord and tenant disputes. This one happens almost every day. So get ready for this one. You need a general knowledge of what action, if any, you can take in these situations. The Florida Residential Landlord and Tenant Act governs most of the traditional recognized rental arrangements for dwellings such as apartments, townhomes, duplexes, single-family housing units, and mobile home parks. In tenancy situations covered by the law, the only way a landlord can legally recover possession of the leased residence without the consent of the tenant is to file an eviction proceeding in a county court where the residence is located. If the landlord is successful, a writ of possession will be issued by the court to the sheriff, who is then authorized to evict the tenant and put the landlord in possession of the residence after a prescribed notice period. So for the sake of the test, just know that only the sheriffs can evict somebody with a writ of possession. Be aware that until legally evicted, a tenant has a right to enter the residence, and a landlord may not prevent entry by changing the locks. If they change the locks, then you tell the tenant, this is your place, you are allowed to break the locks. And they are allowed to break the locks and get back into their house because they have the right to their house. So with these types of situations, you're generally not supposed to get involved, but just explain the tenant and the landlord their rights. Explain to the landlord, look, they live here and they are allowed to be here. You can't change the locks, you can't kick them out, you can't shut off their power or their AC until you go through the process of an eviction. Tell them, hey, go to the county clerk of courts, get an eviction. It takes approximately 2 weeks to a month and a half, depending, and then the sheriffs will come and remove them personally. You may physically evict a tenant only following a writ of possession. So, like, again, you're probably not going to do this, and if you do work for a sheriff's office, they have a special civil unit that handle these specifically. So you as a road deputy will probably never handle these unless you are in that specialized unit. Any action without a writ that causes the removal of a tenant, whether physically removing the tenant's belongings from the residence or suggesting to the tenant that failure to leave may result in arrest, is likely to be considered a wrongful eviction. The Residential Landlord-Tenant Act does not apply in 3 types of residential rental facilities: public lodging establishments such as hotels and motels, medical, geriatric, educational, counseling, religious, or similar residency facilities, and recreational vehicle parks. So basically, a hotel, motel, you can kick people out. They do not have a right to stay there. All right, then we have repossession of property. When a person or company that is owed money, called a creditor, sells or leases property to a person who takes out a loan, called a borrower, the creditor may get a security interest or lien against the property in the form of a contract or security agreement. The contract allows the creditor to take the property as collateral if the borrower defaults or does not repay the loan. The creditor can enforce this stipulation by obtaining a writ of replevin. Know what a writ of replevin is? That is a test question. It is a court order that allows the creditor to take possession of the collateral after the borrower defaults. So basically a repo, right? Outside of a court order, Florida law allows one other option for repossession. A creditor may rely on self-help repossession. Test question here. Self-help repossession is a process where the creditor takes possession of the collateral after default without a court order, only if the repossession can be done without a breach of the peace. In this situation, your role as an officer is to keep the peace. You may not give legal advice to either the borrower or the creditor. Creditors usually hire a recovery agent to repossess properties. Types of property likely to be repossessed include motor vehicles, mobile homes, motorboats, aircrafts, personal watercrafts, all-terrain vehicles, farm equipment, and industrial equipment. Motor vehicles are the most common type of repossessed property. Know that for the test. When responding to a dispute or confrontation about the repossession of a vehicle, you may have to determine, 1, if the vehicle has already been attached to the tow truck and is ready for transport, or if the recovery agent is behind the steering wheel of the vehicle ready to drive away. If this is the case, the repossession is complete and the recovery agent should be permitted to leave. If there is a breach of the peace, in this situation, the recovery agent cannot lawfully take the vehicle, and you will learn more about this in breach of the peace in Chapter 8. So just remember that if you're talking about a normal tow, like a tow company's towing this car because there's parts on the grass, that is not a repo. So this whole, if they're behind the steering wheel, then they're allowed to leave, etc., doesn't really apply to them because it's not a repo, it's just a tow, right? So when it comes to those types of tows, it's civil. And you say, hey, tow guy, if you're willing to, let's just say that the guy who owns the car jumped in his car and the tow guy can't leave because his policy says you can't tow a car with someone inside of it. You tell the tow guy, hey, look, if you want to play chicken with this guy and hope he gets out of his car in the next 10 hours and you're willing to wait 10 hours, then hey, so be it. You tell the other guy, hey, look, if you're willing to wait around and just sit in your car all day, then so be it. Generally, the tow truck is going to drop it because they have other cars to tow and they can't sit there for 10 hours, where the owner of the vehicle can probably just fall asleep in his car and hang out there all day. So that's kind of how you have to handle that situation. You just stand by until they figure it out. Motor vehicle repair disputes. You may sometimes be dispatched to disturbances at automobile repair shops regarding disputes over repair costs. The Florida statutes permit a vehicle owner who refuses to pay the repair bill to take possession of the vehicle after posting a bond with the clerk of the court. After a bond is posted for the amount of the repair invoice, including storage fees, the clerk will issue a certificate directing the repair shop to release the vehicle to the owner. If the vehicle owner refuses to pay the repair costs and removes the vehicle from the repair shop without posting a bond, then the vehicle owner should be investigated for theft. All right, now we have civil disturbance. When responding to a call that is civil in nature, such as a landlord-tenant dispute or child custody issue, be aware that these incidents can become highly confrontational. Evaluate the threat level with information relayed by dispatch. Separate, identify, and interview all the people involved to obtain information related to the incident. Determine if a crime has occurred. You can also perform queries within FCIC and NCIC to determine if an injunction or warrant exists for either person, because that will solve your issue. If you have a mom and dad fighting over a kid, dad's got a warrant, you take dad to jail, the kids go with mom, problem solved. Know what an injunction is. That is a test question, bolded term. It is a court order that requires a person to do or refrain from doing specific acts, such as having no contact with a former spouse or a specific victim of domestic violence. Once you have determined that the disturbance is civil in nature, provide information and resources that will help resolve the conflict. For example, you may assist people involved in a landlord-tenant dispute by referring them to civil court or mediation. Then we have a civil standby. There will be times where you are called to a civil standby. Test question, bolded term here. This is when an officer maintains the peace through officer presence while serving a court order or responding to a call for service. Civil standbys may be conducted in situations such as the execution of a writ of replevin, which we talked about earlier, which is an eviction, a child custody exchange, or a pretrial release order. Typically, a civil standby requires little action by the officer. Your presence is enough to keep the incident calm. If your presence is not enough and the situation begins to escalate, you may separate both parties, recommend that one of the both parties leave, or have them contact the clerk of the court or their attorneys. When necessary, separate and interview them, determine if there's any law enforcement action necessary, and use conflict management skills to prevent escalation of the situation. Policies and procedures differ between agencies on how to handle these, so keep that in mind. Now we have crowd control. Okay, you may be assigned to a special event detail, such as providing security for a sporting event, concert, fair, or political rally. You may also be asked to provide security for event facilities, attendees, and employees. Your agency will provide information regarding the command post for the event, level of enforcement, safety concerns, prohibited items, and other areas of concern. The First Amendment protects the right of peaceful assembly for the community. When the assembly of people is no longer peaceful, law enforcement is called upon to resolve the public disturbance. Instances where the Florida statutes apply to assemblies or groups or to crowd control situations include disorderly intoxication, affrays and riots, unlawful assemblies, routs, melees, and mobs, breach of the peace, and disorderly conduct. People may gather as long as they cause no disturbance and the act within the scope of the law. Your duty is to determine if the demonstration or gathering is lawful based on state statutes and county and municipal ordinances. In Florida, permits may be required for planned events that anticipate a large crowd. You may have to respond to complaints about sudden crowds, such as late-night bars, closing of crowds, leaving a venue. All right, identifying the problem. I'm assuming with crowds. Try to determine the threat level of the crowd, demonstration, or riot by observing the mood, location, direction of travel, and size of the crowd. Several things may affect the crowd's mood, such as the result of a sporting event or a controversial court ruling. Identify if the crowd is organized and if anyone is leading or agitating the crowd. Some crowds may involve gang members, possibly displaying colors, symbols, and weapons. Make sure to monitor. Keep an eye for any weapons. Report any level of escalation or de-escalation. And determine if you need any specialized assistance from SWAT, K9, some riot squad, mounted patrol, etc. Any large gathering could be dangerous, so approach it carefully. It is sometimes difficult to remove or arrest members of a large group. So the crowd being anonymous helps provoke the violent behavior of aggressive individuals. In large crowds, attacks can come from any direction. So always have an exit strategy and prevent crowds from cornering you or stopping you from leaving. A show of force or presence in numbers can be persuasive in calming a crowd. An important part of dispersing crowds and resolving group incidents is determining the leader or instigator. Identify this person by observing how the crowd interacts. Is there someone that the crowd rallies behind? Who does all the talking? Who seems to stand out the most? Etc. Do know that independent criminal violations may occur inside of a crowd, such as underage drinking or illegal narcotics use. These violations must be addressed for officer safety concerns. If intervention is feasible, use discretion when deciding on enforcement action. Okay, alarms and searches. Responding to security alarms. During patrol, you respond to various alarms. Alarms can come from homes, retail stores, schools, government offices, or medical facilities, and may involve incidents of burglary, robbery, panic, fire, or medical alerts. There may be cases when you respond to a false alarm. Your response and tactics will be determined by the type and location of the alarm. Factors to consider are life-threatening situations, danger to the public, or significant loss of property. Some alarms are audible while others are silent, so adjust when necessary. Upon arrival, park your patrol vehicle at a safe distance from the building or residence. The location you choose depends on the situation. Try to identify the cause of the alarm. If a crime has occurred and there are no suspects present, secure the scene. If you determine the suspects are present, develop a tactical plan to apprehend them. Ask yourself the following questions. Do you need a perimeter? Do the suspects know you're there? Do you need to conduct a building search? And do you need to call for additional resources like K9 or tactical team? You'll also possibly respond to non-criminal or unknown alarms, such as fire or medical alarms. Your responsibility in these situations is to identify the issue and notify the proper agency to respond to the incident. Building search principles. At times, you'll be required to conduct building searches, including calls for alarms, open doors, burglaries, and trespassing. And some of these incidents may turn to high-risk situations. You must determine if a building search is legally allowed before conducting one. Recall the exigent circumstances that justify a warrantless entry from Chapter 3. If necessary, secure the exterior of the building with a perimeter. Direct people who are not involved to a safe location. And if possible, obtain access to the property through the owner or property agent. Do not search buildings alone. Use additional resources or K9. Make sure you don't have any jangling keys, loose change, cell phones, or anything making noise. The greatest threat in a building search is the possibility of a suspect in hiding. Know that for a test. Always remember that a suspect inside of the building can be armed and dangerous, so conduct a thorough and careful search, because failure to do so can lead to fatal results. Before entering a building, determine how to enter a building based on how the doors and windows open. For example, before entering, note which direction the door opens by locating the hinges. Whatever the entry point, use the appropriate strategy to enter the building. Generally, you enter buildings through a doorway. Before entering a building, request an emergency radio channel through dispatch and draw your firearm. In certain situations, you may knock and announce your presence to allow the people inside to exit or any suspects to surrender. Be cautious of anyone who may be hiding behind doors. When working in pairs, maintain visual contact, communicate, and be aware of each other's actions. Make sure to give loud verbal commands when necessary. Alright, entering and clearing a building. Systematically search the structure, keeping track of cleared rooms or areas. As you move through a building, remain aware of fatal funnels. Test question bolded term. Fatal funnels are narrow spaces that restrict movement. These spaces are typically doorways, hallways, and windows. You should also be aware of deep corners. Bolded test question. Deep corners are corners that cannot be visually cleared from the doorway and must be checked first upon entry. Be mindful of people hiding in shadows and dark areas. Okay, before entering a room, visually clear as much of the room as possible. One technique for visually clearing a room is called cutting the pie or edging. Okay, here we go. Stand to one side of the door and scan as many parts of the room as possible. When entering a room, move deliberately. Make sure you guys know the crisscross method and the button hook method. There are diagrams here on how to do them. Those will be on the test. They are the two most common methods for entering a room. Again, that's crisscross and button hook techniques. In the crisscross technique, officers start on opposite side of the doorway and they enter rapidly one after the other, crossing to the opposite sides. In the button hook, they're both on opposite sides and they both button hook, turn the corner, and maintain the same side they're on. When searching, clear rooms of immediate threats, starting with the deep corners. It is important to stay together and search each room thoroughly before moving to the next. Communicate with your fellow officers when moving through your area. Once you clear the building, return the building to the responsible person. Then we have area searches. Okay, perimeter. This is a test question, bolded term. A perimeter is an area of containment surrounding the site of an incident. The size and scope of the perimeter depends upon the nature of the incident. It may include natural or artificial barriers. Situations will occur where it will be necessary to create a perimeter. You can use a perimeter when securing a crime scene or during a search for suspects. A high-risk situation, a special event, or any incident where access to an area needs to be restricted to authorized individuals. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, monitoring ground searches for a suspect. Often, suspects escape into an open area. The grounds surrounding a building, a neighborhood, or a business area. Officer safety is always the primary concern, so ask for backup and additional resources such as aviation or canine units as necessary. The techniques used for searching grounds are similar to building searches. Work with a partner, don't expose yourself, use cover and concealment, etc. Okay, encountering people during a search. During a search, you will find people who will have a legitimate reason to be in the area. This includes employees, residents, or cleaning personnel. Consider any person in the area a potential threat until you or another officer determine the status. Fleeing suspect on foot. During a consensual encounter, if the person you are speaking to decides to flee, you do not have grounds to pursue. This is important. I have seen this happen before. If you are in a consensual encounter and the person you're speaking to decides to leave or run away, you do not have grounds to pursue. A person's flight is not enough to provide probable cause for an arrest, but it does contribute to a reasonable suspicion to detain the person for investigation. When you have reasonable suspicion to detain the suspect and the suspect flees, you have the legal authority to pursue. So you can only pursue someone if you have reasonable suspicion. During a foot pursuit, clearly communicate via the radio your location, direction of travel, and description of the suspect and possible charges. Attempt to keep your eyes on the suspects. If you lose sight of the suspect, be aware of the possibility of an ambush. A foot pursuit is an ever-changing, stressful event, and you must constantly reassess officer and public safety during the pursuit. Deciding whether to pursue with a drawn firearm depends on the circumstances. Pursuing with a firearm in hand presents a number of significant safety hazards, such as an accidental shooting. Certain conditions will present increased risks, such as corners, fences, wooded areas, swimming pools, and animals. When going around blind corners, slow down and tactically clear the corner. If you lose radio contact with dispatch, reevaluate the decision to pursue. You or your supervisor may decide to end a pursuit at any time when one of three things. The suspect's location is unknown. You're unable to continue because of injury, fatigue, or unfamiliarity with the area. Or 3, you establish the suspect's identity and he is no longer a threat. Alright, then we have, moving on to taking custody of a suspect. So the first part is going to be making a physical custody arrest. You will take certain steps when making a physical custody arrest. Inform suspects that they are under arrest and the reason for the arrest. Properly handcuff suspects, including double lock, before searching for weapons or contraband. Okay, separate the arrestee's personal property from evidence and contraband. At times, it may be necessary in an arrest situation to provide information to victims, witnesses, and possibly the arrestee's family members, all of whom may have a direct interest in the incident. State law and agency policies regulate what information can be released to the public. People near the scene may be using mobile devices to record all aspects of the incident, including your behavior. This is not a criminal offense, and you cannot interfere unless the person recording the incident is actively obstructing the investigation. There may be reporters present asking detailed questions at the scene. Most agencies have a designated public information officer, PIO, know that for the test, who is responsible for releasing information to the media. The PIO will be informed of the situation and prepare a response to media requests. Okay, you must maintain physical control of the arrestee during the entire escort. Use the escort techniques discussed in defensive tactics. This will ensure officer and arrestee safety and prevent the arrestee from falling or fleeing. Never assume that the arrestee has already been searched before placing them in a transport vehicle. Every time custody of the arrestee is transferred from one officer to another, conduct another search and secure all personal property, evidence, or contraband. Okay, when placing an arrestee in your vehicle, make sure the window controls and door handles are disabled. Well, you're getting a car, they're going to be disabled, so don't worry about that. Make sure the rear passenger compartment of your vehicle is clear of any drugs, weapons, or equipment. Search the handcuffed arrestee thoroughly and take immediate possession of all personal property, evidence, and contraband. Assist the arrestee into the transport vehicle and secure the arrestee seatbelt. Okay, specific transport situations. You cannot transport a juvenile in the same vehicle with an adult arrestee unless they are co-defendants. Which, honestly, you probably won't anyway. Even if they are co-defendants, your sergeant or supervisor will probably tell you not to anyway, plus it's smart not to anyway. Notify dispatch when you transport an arrestee needing medical attention to a medical facility or if you have requested EMS. When transporting an arrestee with a disability or specific need, adjust transport procedures in a manner that doesn't compromise officer safety. When transporting a pregnant arrestee, you may want to place restraints in the front of an arrestee. Consider weather conditions and temperatures if you cannot transport the arrestee immediately after loading. You may encounter additional obstacles such as the arrestee's size, health, or medical conditions. Evaluate based on what you need. When arresting a person who appears to be under the influence or not in control of their physical functions, examine what medical condition they might have, and you may need to have them seek a medical attention or maybe have them ride along in an ambulance and you ride along with them. Okay, while en route. En route, you may encounter situations that cause interruptions. If this happens, find a safe place to pull over. Notify dispatch of location and mileage. Notify your supervisor and request backup. These situations can include the arrestee becoming combative or removing their restraints, the arrestee having a medical issue such as a seizure, the transport vehicle is involved in a crash or malfunction, you encounter a life-threatening event, or the arrestee escapes or attempts to escape. Okay, transporting an incarcerated pregnant person. According to the Healthy Pregnancy for Incarcerated Woman Act, you must not use restraints for an incarcerated pregnant person who is in labor, delivery, or postpartum recovery unless you determine that they present a substantial flight risk or other extraordinary medical or security circumstance making restraints necessary. So again, this is only if they're in labor, delivery, or postpartum. This is not for your normal 6 months pregnant, 7 months pregnant, even 8 months pregnant. They have to be in labor, in delivery, or postpartum. Okay, arrival. When you arrive at the destination, so you're arriving at the jail, notify dispatch and report the ending vehicle mileage. Approach the vehicle drop-off point and obtain clearance to enter. After arriving at the detention facility, secure your weapons in a locked location, such as the patrol vehicle's trunk, a weapons locker, or lockbox. Make sure to gather all personal property for the arrestee, safely move the arrestee from the vehicle, maintain physical control, and know that you are responsible of the arrestee until the staff receives them. Alright, processing an arrestee. First, we're going to talk about juveniles. You can take a juvenile to a secure booking area of a jail or an adult jail for temporary custody for no more than 6 hours, or for the purpose of fingerprinting and photographing them as long as the juvenile is out of sight and hearing of adult arrestees. Most juveniles in adult jails or police lockups are waiting to be transported to an appropriate facility or on pre- or post-court holding. So generally, you're going to take a juvenile to a juvenile detention center. You're not going to take them to central jail or some sort of jail that you have, so it'll be to a JAC. So generally, you'll take them straight to the JAC. You won't have to worry about these types of situations. Okay, entering the detention facility. Many agencies use booking or intake officers. These are law enforcement or correction officers at the county jail. These facilities have their own policies and procedures, and you must know and follow them. So you're going to tell the booking officer the charges against the arrestee, any injuries he has, if he's a juvenile or not, if the arrestee was contaminated with pepper spray, if he used a dart firing stun gun, any threats to the arrestee made to anybody else, or any known medical conditions. Obviously, you're going to give them their personal property, etc. Okay, booking. After the transport, the booking officer processes the arrestee. So it's good to know this, but you're not going to do any of this. This process includes fingerprinting, photographing, inventorying personal property, and then entering all of their information into FCIC, NCIC. Okay, completing the arrest process. After you turn over the arrestee and the arrest affidavit to the booking officer, inform dispatch of the call's completion and its outcome. Document your arrest completely and accurately. Your document should clearly convey investigative facts to assist in prosecution. And that concludes Chapter 5. Looks like we're at an hour and a half here. That one is a huge chapter. There will be a shortened version of this chapter, probably in the 30 to 40 minute range. I will be launching that shortly after this one. So stay tuned. But if you stay with me to the end here, congratulations, good work. You're going to do well on the test. This test is a little bit of a doozy in my opinion. Just remember that how Chapter 2 communication was a little confusing. This Chapter 5 doesn't have a whole lot of definition words. It's a very subjective, how you're responding to situations. It's kind of subjective. So just learn the material really well. Watch this video once or twice. Read through that chapter a few times. Do any other resources, flashcards, note cards that you have. Watch the short edition version when en route to your test, day of, or maybe the week of, and really dive in deep to this one because this is a huge chapter, a whole lot of information with a lot of subjective type material. Thankfully, it should be only 50 questions for you guys. So just learn those bullet points and then learn the topics that I mentioned in this video. Everything else, there might be questions on it, but the main stuff I covered is probably going to be 40 out of 50 questions, and the last 10 is going to be common knowledge or things you probably should know anyway. So, good luck on that test. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Deputy Z signing off.